I'm Mari Dangerfield, and you're listening to Sound of Stylus, a podcast all about the stylophone and the people who do cool things with it. In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Leah Kardos, who's Leah Kardos of also the Kingston University Stylophone Orchestra. Leah Kardos is an extraordinary woman bursting with vision, as well as being an artist in her own right and leader of the unique Kingston University Stylophone Orchestra. She is senior lecturer in music at Kingston University, project leader of Visconti Studio, co-founded with Tony Visconti, and a published author with Words in the Wire and her recently released first book, Blackstar Theory, The Last Works of David Bowie. I've known Leah since around 2015. She was offering advice for my dissertation at university, which was on David Bowie. And now she's here to join us on the podcast to talk about the orchestra, Bowie, and of course, stylophones. Leah, great to have you. Thank you so much for joining me. It feels like it's been such a long time coming, kind of having any kind of discussion with you on this topic that we really share a lot in common with, I think.
No, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. And I'm very honoured to be your guest.
So let's talk about your kind of journey, your story with the stylophone. This goes back to about 2019, so where we're talking about the Stylophone Orchestra.
That's right, yeah.
So how did it all start out with the orchestra? Like, how did it get going?
So it just sort of began as, I guess, a goof or just an experiment. A goof's probably not giving it the credence it deserves, but I was given a bunch of stylophones by the Debrec company, and they happened to be at the university because Tony was at the university at that time.
Right.
And they were working with him on a special 50th anniversary of the stylophone project. I think it was a competition where they were asking people to make music using his stylophone, and he was going to be the judge. And so that was all happening. And I happened to be at the uni when they visited, and we got to talking. And Debrec seemed to be interested in donating instruments to us, partly for music education purposes, so we could train our music education students in how to use them in classrooms. But also there were some vintage instruments that they wanted to donate to us as well for our archive. Yeah. And I just saw all those instruments, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to try and make a group, an ensemble, to see what it would sound like. And I kind of blurted that out, and then decided to try it that academic year. And we didn't really know how it would sound or what it would be or what we'd play. But, whenever there's this sort of fun project just sort of staring you in the face like that, you'd be silly not to do it. So that's where it started for me. But of course, I was aware of stylophones anyway, because they were the quirky instrument that was associated with Bowie. And I've got deep interest and deep fandom of Bowie myself. So I've always wanted to play with them, and this was a really good excuse to do so.
So it's like your Bowie, kind of another side to your Bowie fandom was able to emerge, and kind of coming up with this amazing idea. Like, you're presented with all these instruments, and then you're like, why not? Let's make a group.
Why not? Yeah. I mean, that seems to be the story of my academic career in a nutshell, really. It's kind of, research is driven by your interests. Naturally, every music researcher is the same. But for me specifically, my day job at uni and my research interests as a musicologist and creator, and my fandom, the music that I'm really passionate about, tend to be a Venn diagram that meet in the middle a lot of the time, which I feel really lucky about. I feel very fortunate to, be working with Visconti Studio and to be playing with Debrec's instruments and having partnership with them, and to be writing about Bowie, as well as just making music myself. All of that ticks a lot of boxes for me as a musician and an intellectual. So yeah, I feel very lucky. But at the same time, I think if you're curious, it'll be true for you as well, Mari. I think that when you're curious and interested in something, it tends to pop up in your life. It tends to become an opportunity, so you kind of invite it in a way. I think that's true as well.
I actually don't know if you know this, but on that topic, from like being in touch with Marcella and John for a while, it was like that time, like you were saying, the competition and stuff. I remember there was the golden stylophone as the prize. It was this S1
That's
that
right.
they'd painted with gold paint. I don't know who won that in the end, actually.
I've never seen it. I've kept my eyes open. I thought it'd show up somewhere on a YouTube video or something, and it
Yeah, it's
hasn't.
such a cool thing. Like, why did it not? I don't know. They do have this thing about wanting to donate instruments and stuff. They're really good in that way. Like, they really want to do good as well with the company and help people who want to start learning music. Because, like, the stylophone is such an accessible thing, right? It's a great starting point for many people into music.
It's really good for teaching. I mean, I do a module at Kingston called Music and Technology in Education.
Right, yeah.
And one of the things I do every year with them is I give them all a stylophone and I say, look at this amazing tool. And a lot of them sort of stare at it like not knowing what to do. And there's like, you can do intervals with it. You can learn by rote. You can do melodic dictation. If you stand back to back with me and I play something and you follow, there's so many ways that, particularly melodic based music training, and rounds and playing it as a rhythm instrument. And it's just so accessible and it's so affordable. It's, it's small. You can get a lot of them in a room and do so many things with them. I hope that music teachers start using them in classrooms because they're not just toys, they're instruments. And I think there's lots of potential there, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hopefully there'll be more uptake in schools, like primary school especially. Like a lot of children, like their first instrument might be the recorder or the piano, but why not start with the stylophone? That could be the new
I
thing.
agree. It has a volume control. I mean, recorders don't.
Yeah, exactly. It's just one loud, annoying, essentially, sound.
Exactly.
Plus, you can plug some earphones. Well, you could with the old model at least plug some earphones in and keep quiet, disturb everyone.
True.
But yeah, like as I was saying with like the donations and stuff, I do remember like having a clear like discussion with Marcella about, is there anywhere, do you know, like that do you think could benefit from stuff? And I don't know if it was like me or if it was Tony or it was like, I don't know where it happened, but I'd like to think like maybe I helped you to gain the instruments, because I did remember.
Maybe you did. Maybe you were our guardian angel.
I don't know. I don't want to like say anything, but maybe. I don't know. It might have been Tony as well. Here's something I don't think I've ever asked you. You discovered David Bowie when?
I don't know how interesting it is. My fan origin story. I don't know if you're interested in that. But I discovered Bowie at uni when I was at university, which was in 1998. And I joined BowieNet at that time. And my music background was quite classical, it was quite sort of, I was really into jazz and I was really into musicians that could play really well. So I was really into chops and like virtuosity and clever music. But when I was introduced to Bowie's performance style, I realized that there was a lot more to pop music than just how clever it is or how difficult it is to play. It was a lot about the storytelling and the embodiment and the drama and and then the voice and how theatrical that is, but also how the whole lyric, music, arrangement, production, visual aspect all go together to create something bigger than the sum of its parts. And then from there I went back and discovered all the other stuff. So that would have been around Earthling time. Like I joined the train. Nice. And then from there I went backwards, but I was also there for all of the late work. So I was there as everything came out after that. That's awesome. But yeah, and I wish I could do that again, actually. Like I'm always jealous of people that discover Bowie and you know, they're like, where shall I begin? And I'm like, oh, you're in for a good few years of discovery here. And I can't wait till you discover things like Station to Station or Low or Scary Monsters or Young Americans. Like I'm so jealous of people that have that ahead of them.
To get to like start their journey all over from the beginning and experience.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly.
But Earthling, what a period to start with.
Well, it was this, and also like I had my best friend at uni. We were into Bowie at the same time, discovering Bowie at the same time, we got Earthling, and we were like, oh my god! And we discovered drum and bass from it, and all the remixes.
Right.
There was a big remix culture around Bowie's work at that time. So
Okay.
we got into Roni Size, and we got into Tricky, and we got into the bands he was into at the time, Placebo and Uncle, and all this. And then we were so excited for the next album, and then it was ours, and it was like this thing of like, what is this? And it was a very like sort of authentic Bowie fan moment of being completely spun around, completely taken, a slap in the face almost stylistically. Okay, now I've got to totally like think about this differently now. But yeah, it was a wonderful time to be a fan. Of course, BowieNet was a exciting thing as well back then.
Right, BowieNet, that's like a whole era that I guess I missed out on, because that was...
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine it now as well, because like it really was like just this sort of message board essentially in a chat room, and sort of Bowie was involved with it, so he would create content to share with the fans, in the forms of like blog posts, questions he'd ask, like Q&A, and he'd show up on the boards himself and like chat, and there'd be like scheduled chats as well, and sometimes he'd just pop in the chat. His name was Sailor, and so you always knew that was him, and that was an anagram of Isola, which is his company.
Whoa,
and
really
it was just bizarre to have that access, because particularly in the late period and the last period, he just was so inaccessible.
Right, yeah.
Whereas back then it was very normal, or at least that performance was. Who knows what the performance of Bowie is actually all about, but certainly his engagement with the fandom was very different back then.
That's
quite a special time. Yeah, and I'm friends with a lot of those people still to this day as well.
Really? Oh, so it opened a whole world to you of mutual friendships and...
Absolutely, yeah. And I was in Australia, and of course he hadn't been to Australia since like the late 80s. But he hadn't played a gig since this Glass Spider tour, and then he came back for Reality. But of course, in between, he hadn't been for so long, and there was no one I knew aside from my friend at uni who was a Bowie netter.
Okay.
And so I was just thinking, I want to get to the UK, I want to get to America, I want to see these gigs, because he's on tour so much through that time, Yeah, and it was a really great way of making friends. Back when I was, a university student in Australia, I'm still friends with these people today now, a 43-year-old woman in London. I still hang out with these people, so it's quite special, I think. Yeah.
It's one of those things, isn't it? When you find a special interest and people that share that, you're kind of going to bond for life, I think, sometimes. It's just one of those things. That's so awesome.
And it is a lovely thing. I've got friends in America who I see every few years if I travel there, but I know I'm going to be close with them, so long as we are in contact, and it's nice, and yeah, I think these days I don't know so much how those communities can, I'm sure they do, they have to, because they're very organic, but the way that BowieNet was quite a closed off community. Okay. In the sense that people had to subscribe to it. It was expensive, it was a bit of a privileged community. People had to subscribe to this thing, but it felt like it was quite unique and special. Whereas now there's a lot of like fan groups that exist on Facebook pages or in Discords and things like that. But they seem to be, and Reddit, I suppose, but they seem quite short-lived in the sense that the communities tends to refresh itself or move on, or doesn't seem to be a permanent fixture. Although I could be wrong. Maybe it's just me being old and not connected. But yeah, I think social media has changed the landscape of these communities and the speed of their lives, I suppose.
I definitely agree. It's amazing that he was kind of preceding social media with that kind of group, almost like a social media / Patreon membership, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was that. It was kind of Patreon, and it was also totally prefiguring the model now of like where celebrities need to create content to keep their fans happy, which is now the norm, right? For good or bad. Yeah,
for good or bad, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, but it's so cool that you got to be a part of it. So you discovered Bowie at uni. What about the stylophone, like along that journey of discovering Bowie? Was it the same time? Was it much later? Was it before?
Oh, it was much later. I think I honestly I knew about them, and I just never had one until I would say 2013-ish, when I started playing in a band in London, James Ewers's band. He was called Lone Sound at the time, and I was
Okay.
playing keyboard for him, synthesizer, and
Oh,
just
nice.
extra bits. And he handed me a stylophone one day and a melodica and a few other bits and pieces
Yeah.
to play in his band. And that's when I finally had one. And
Okay.
I played it, and it, up until that point, I just thought, oh yeah, it's just a little synth, I understand. But obviously, when you play it, its mode of engagement as a musician is really unique, and it
Mm-hmm.
influences what sounds you want to make on it, which I wasn't expecting that at all. I just thought, like,
Yeah.
being a keyboard player, I thought, present me with anything that's keyboard based, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But with the stylophone, it is just that little bit different and a little bit alien as an
Mm-hmm.
instrument, and delicate to play, but indelicate in sound, and that's a very strange combination
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
to work with, which I found really quite interesting, and it's beguiling actually. So that's the quality that you want to lean into with it, which is the thing that I believe Bowie did correctly with the instrument, in that he lent into that quality of it, whereas you hear it in other places and it seems simply
Mm-hmm.
just copying a guitar, or
Okay.
it's just doing something really rudimentary. I think
Yeah.
he made it sing in a way that made it quite melancholy and emotional, which I think is exactly what that
Okay.
instrument is screaming out for. But
Yeah,
I think the
definitely.
best music that stylophone uses leans into that. I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
really important part of
That's
its
interesting.
timbre. And I think you hear like bands that have used it, or like Jack White or whatever, and it's just like this edge to a bigger riff, or it's just this edge on top of a bigger sound that they've used it for. But
Mm-hmm.
when you hear like ensemble stylophones, or a stylophone solo that's been performed on the instrument with some care, um, you realize that the music is shaped by the attack that's instant, but the
Mm-hmm.
sustain that is constant. But then that the fact that you've got this very delicate instrument across that quite brutal sound is what shapes the melodic content around it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of the secret of its beauty in a way, but it takes a particular type of musician to play it that way. Certainly, that's one of the fascinating little gray areas of the instrument that I really quite enjoy
Okay.
exploring with the orchestra. And trying to sort of play around with. I mean, and also the thing that I'm interested in, which is still a question mark for me,
Okay.
is what does it sound like when we've got 50 of them? I really want to hear a big
Right.
ensemble. And we tried to do that on the record. We multi-tracked
Mm-hmm.
it loads of times, and it was a cool sound on record, but that's different to in real life. So I'm very
Mm-hmm.
keen to try and get stylophones en masse, like a really massed chorus of them, just to see whether that's the beautiful sound I imagine in my head that it is, this kind of
Yeah, I imagine.
delicate chorus of just the thinnest, you know, razor sharp noises. But if you got loads of them, does it have a softness to it? I think it might.
Yeah,
Um,
I
yeah.
think you could be right. Maybe you'll have to do like a Guinness World Record or something. The most stylophonists in a field.
That'd be a good thing. I mean, yes, I think that's one of the dreams for the orchestra, is just to recruit lots and lots of people.
I think it's time for us to move on and chat
Okay.
about
Oh,
this,
yes. Yeah.
which, for anyone who can't see because that's everybody, is the Stylophonika album, the first album from the Kingston University Stylophone Orchestra. Um, what made you decide to release an album? How did it all get going?
So the seeds for the idea were sown when we did the Space Oddity session you were there for,
Okay.
which was
Mhm.
in September 2019. So like the group had been going for nearly a year, or since the January anyway. Um,
Mhm.
and it was something I really wanted to do to mark the occasion, just because of the tie-in of the instrument, the cultural significance of the song and the instrument, and the date, and the fact we had Tony there. I just thought we have to
Right.
do this. So that
That'd be
was,
perfect. Yeah.
yeah, it was just a perfect confluence of things. So we knocked that arrangement together. We did the session, which was great, and the song. We did the video. It was lots of fun, and it
Mhm.
was just going to be
Definitely.
that. We were just going to do that one thing. But then when the pandemic sort of unfolded a few months later, um, the group couldn't rehearse, and of course every year there's always a switch over where students leave, people come in. And when we came in September, I just remember some of the group were sort of like, what are we going to do this year? Are we still going to do something? And we had sort of Zoom meetings, and I sort of said to them, look, you know, do you want to do something? Do you want to meet? Do you want to work on a recording? And everyone was keen to work on a recording. So we did it. So we made a plan, and I set these deadlines. I was writing my book at the time, so I was sort of, I was almost keen for us to not do it, because I was like, I got stuff to do. You know, I'm writing this book. I'm a bit stressed out, and they were like, no, let's do this. So we chose the songs, and we had got some arrangements together, and I sent out the parts. We met at one point, and I gave everyone some stylophones and some equipment, some microphones, some interfaces, all sorts of things so they could record at home. And then we just sort of farmed the pieces out, and we just did it online. And as the pieces came back, I integrated them in Logic into, I guess, a kind of demo arrangement. And then when it came round time about March 2021, is that right? Yeah, 2021. We had some original pieces. So Susanna had written acoustic key by that point, and I'd arranged it. Yeah. And we'd integrated that Harold Budd tribute as well. And we could go to Visconti Studio and sort of record some more. And that was the day where we sort of met again and thought creatively. And we had sort of the bones of it at that point. And again, I was still so preoccupied with my book that I wasn't really even thinking much about it. I was just like, this is great. Yeah, let's just do this, and put it together really quickly, and really didn't think much would come of it. I just thought this was like a project that we would just do to spend our pandemic year having fun together. I didn't think that would ever get released or do anything like get played on the radio or anything like that. So it was a huge surprise to me that Spun Out of Control Records wanted to release it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And it was just so surprising. And then we sort of started taking pictures. You were there for the photo shoot day in May, and and all things started happening, and it got mastered. And it was sort of and I kind of came out of the fog of writing my book, and I looked at it and I was like, it's actually quite good, you know. I think it turned out all right. And yeah, it came out earlier this year, and it's just done really well, and it has an audience. And I'm so, I don't know, not shocked, but just kind of, you know, really appreciative of everyone who helped us along that journey, and everyone like yourself who donated time and energy to it. From what began as like a kind of, you know, let's keep the group together during pandemic type project, to actually something that I think all of us are quite proud of as an artistic object, you know, that we all worked on together.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just, yeah, and it was really nice. It was a really nice thing to do, and I'm so glad we did it.
Amazing.
The way we did it.
All the struggles. I mean, I knew that it was a pandemic, but I didn't realize the lengths you'd gone to get everyone.
Oh my gosh, yes,
and involved. So, and the fact that you were also finishing your book, which we're going to talk about soon.
yeah, it was. But I think part of that was good, because it just meant that I think it helped the project, because I think I didn't take over it. I think I have a tendency as an artist to particularly if I'm working at home on a project like an album, I probably would have done too much of my own thing with it. Whereas because it was literally such a rush, and I was just doing what the group was doing as well, I put together these arrangements. It did feel like a group effort and not just me doing it, and which was really important, I think, for everybody, not just myself. It probably would have been easy for me to, if I was bored during the pandemic, to have completely finessed some kind of unnatural object out of all of those things that I had, all those stylophone recordings. But the fact that I kind of kept it a bit raw, kept it quite live, didn't have the time to rearrange and, you know, remix or re-edit much of it. Meant that what we had in the end felt true to everybody, and everyone could hear themselves in it, which I think was crucial as well. Yeah, it was really nice.
Really cool. Amazing. I love the fact that, as you're saying, you kind of just left everyone to kind of do their thing and make it really an individual but a group project at the same time. I feel like that's how you approach the orchestra as well. Like, everybody's sort of, whilst you're the leader, they're kind of allowed to just do their own thing, and that's kind of what also makes the group, I feel.
I'm glad you say that. I hope so. I don't well, I mean, I recognize my own sort of control freak tendencies, and I really try not to indulge those with the orchestra, because it is a group effort. And also I think it's important that everyone feels like they're contributing to it, or have a say, or have, be able to express their opinion, and for everyone to go, that's a good idea, let's try that. A good example would be like, we have Richard in the group at the moment, who's a noise artist, and he brings an element of chaos to the group that's really unique. But it's really important for me to also make room for him to be a noise artist in the group, and for us to be Stylophone Orchestra with a noise artist as a resident member. We've got Tommy at the moment, who is bringing a mini Logue in, which is not a stylophone, it's a monosynth. Actually, it's a polysynth. But the fact that, that affords us an element of sound design, which affords him an element of self-expression, and then ownership of the arrangements. And the arrangements are quite, I think, by necessity, they're quite strict, in the sense that, the pieces are arranged, they're dictated down, they're going to be so long. There isn't a jam session. It's not like a standard where you can go off. But within that, I like everyone to have some kind of ownership of their sound, and to be able to hear themselves shaping the collective sound as well. I think it's important. And and for that reason, the orchestra does change a little bit as members come and go, because they bring that to the table.
Yeah, beauty. It's like something slightly different each time. There's never the same experience, and I'm sure that with your new uptake coming in the new academic year, that's only going to be more and more exciting. And hopefully, if there's anyone listening that wants to join, they will get in touch with you.
Please do. Yes. Anyone who's in London, particularly southwest London, but anywhere in London where you don't mind traveling to Kingston to rehearse, we're open. You don't have to be a music student or a Kingston student, or even necessarily like a trained musician. You can join if you want to. There'll be a place for you. Just get in touch with me. The more the merrier, to be honest.
So Stylophonika has enjoyed some incredible success. Why do you think it's been so successful?
I honestly don't know. I guess because it's a little bit funny. I guess because people expect it to sound juvenile and naive, and maybe it sounds a little bit surprisingly emotional. I think it's partly to do with the retro futuristic songs we do. So we do some Vangelis, we do some Jare, we do some Eno, Wendy Carlos. So I think it's a mixture of a kind of retro nostalgic emotion combined with a surprise factor with the instrument itself. The fact that people are expecting it to sound abrasive or childish, and that it does sound that way, but it also sounds surprisingly deep and panoramic as well. I think, I guess it has a novelty factor, but at the same time, I'd like to think people like the care and effort that's gone into it, and that it takes itself seriously in a way, I suspect. But I mean, I don't know. I can't answer that question.
Well, it's been incredible. You've been on BBC Six a few times. You've been in Electronic Sound magazine, loads of other publications.
I know, right?
As well. So you've done something right.
It's really great. I mean, just feeling so honoured and thankful that people want to engage with it. That everyone that bought a copy, it's amazing.
It certainly is, and I'm excited to see what else come about from the group in this kind of format.
Like a recording. People have asked me, and I don't know. I've got some ideas, but I think we need to, as a group, think about the next steps. We need to have a band meeting to discuss it.
Yeah, definitely.
But I wouldn't mind. Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing maybe some more classical, or some game soundtracks or film soundtracks, things like that. I know some of the members have mentioned doing like just more classic electronica Some people want to do pop or sort of new wave or,
Okay, yeah.
70s and 80s electronic pop. But we'd have to try and nail a concept. I think it needs to have a coherent theme, whatever we do next.
That's very exciting. So many possibilities ahead.
Yeah.
This is literally just scratching the surface, I think, with what can be achieved in this unique sound that you've found from the group. So you obviously produced almost every track on this record, including one original composition of yours, Brundle Beat, which actually the original also has a stylophone part, doesn't it? Which is really nice.
Yeah. Yes, that was it was a last minute addition. It wasn't going to be on the list, and then I think Gavin at the label was like, "There's room for one more," and so the group we were practicing Brundle Beat at rehearsals just as a round to warm up with, and people suggested it. Isabella and Kian suggested it, and I thought, well, okay, well, I've already got Logic Project, what I did for Bird Rib, so we can hollow that out and put your performances in and replace some things. So it was relatively straightforward, but it was obviously obvious to do, and I don't know why we didn't think of it first.
So cool. Yeah, why not? The one that you've already done with some stylophone.
Yeah. The one stylophone composition I had in the bag, and I didn't think of it. That's silly.
Well, it was meant to be then, clearly.
Yeah.
So how did you find like producing it, mixing the record? I know you said it was all kind of quite organic and you didn't have a lot of time. Did you find any kind of useful approaches in that time with the stylophone in terms of arranging it, producing it, mixing it?
Yeah. As I said, because I was so focused on the book, it was sort of helpful in the sense that I would sequester 2 days of my week to do like a mix and send it. So it was very on the clock, and I was just kind of just getting through it. So I wasn't too engaged in perfectionist mode. I think helped in the end keep the spirit of the project, and it has a vibe to it that isn't too overproduced, which was always a risk with a project like this, particularly when you're doing a lockdown project and everyone's hands on it. But I would say that I had a back to front sort of way of working with it. So I had thinking about it like composing like a cinematographer might. I've got your background, you've got your middle ground and your foreground, and I would try and put stylophone sounds in each of those places to create perspective. And I would split the orchestra into left and right, like almost in my head, like if I was at Royal Festival Hall looking at LPO play, you'd have sort of your violins, ones and twos, violas, cellos, basses, and then from there I'd sort of think about mixing the parts in a similar way in the distance. And I was using reverbs and filters to get them to cohere. And then in the foreground, then the sounds would be more naked. And then in the midground, they'd have a mixture of like spectral effects or delays, or they might be further out in the stereo field. So I managed to sort of replicate that sort of image on each of the tracks, and it made short work of producing the album, in a sense that I had the orchestra sound kind of ready to go, not as a template necessarily, but just knowing how I wanted to stage the sounds. And then from there, it sort of made room for melodies, articulations, effects, Moog things that George was doing, beats or sequences, and vocals in some regards. So yeah, I found it to be working quickly really good, because I find sometimes if I work really quickly like that, your intuitive creator sort of kicks in, and you tend to make some good choices that you don't overthink, as I said before.
Yeah.
And it was also good because, as I said, I could give the whole thing over to Kian, who mixed it for me, which was really lovely. And he's got a really good ear. Yeah, he's a member of the group, but he's also just a kick-ass sound engineer and mixer. I mean, the guy's ear is golden. And he was really great. So he could clean it up even further. And it was nice to sort of have that collaborative team. And then Ben Whiffen mastered it. And so again, it went off to someone else and it got mastered for vinyl. Then of course the vinyl came back. And so when you hear it at the end, it's kind of, it wasn't like the whole just my job to do it all. It was, I was relying on everybody else to step in and help too.
I feel like the approach that you have with the album that you've just talked about, I think that's like kind of how it was when you were starting the group as well. When you were trying to figure out what's the sound that we're going to have. It sort of, I think it changed a bit at different stages as well. And then you had the new instruments coming in, the 2020 S1. How was all of that kind of?
Yeah. So when we first started, it was, I think, everybody playing stylophones, but the stylophones sounded different back then. So this was before the analog module, and they had a rougher tone in general. It didn't sound as attractive to my ear anyway. And part of our practice was to try and massage that sound a little. So being a producer myself and an engineer, my first solution was, let's just put the sound through effects.
Yeah.
And that might help. So we shape it. So I remember buying this like crazy like parametric EQ and then putting it into reverb effects. But that it worked in a sense, but it was not good for live because people couldn't hear themselves in that soup. Yeah. The more you massage the sound to make it more ambient, on the good side of that is the more ambient the sound is, the more attractive it is, and the more you can do with it as a color. Yeah. But it's not good for players because they can't hear themselves because there's no articulation, there's no fidelity in there. And then if everyone can hear themselves, then the sound is really rough and really bumpy, razor sharp. It's got edges to it that are really hard to work with, and the sound is less musically useful. And so we were having trouble finding a midpoint between those two things. But then when we did the Tony Visconti day in the studio, he memorably, this was a big change for us, he recorded us like a real string ensemble where he put like these microphones on top, and we were playing just through the little speakers and using the room ambience. And this was much more, I guess, conducive to a good performance. Like all of a sudden the orchestra could hear themselves and hear where they weren't playing properly. And he kind of put us through our paces and said, you've got to start and end together. You've got to be in tune. You've got to play in time. But actually we could hear it, whereas before we really couldn't hear who was out of time or what was going on. It was all a bit messy. Exactly. And so that was a really big moment for me where I discovered that actually the collective sound of stylophones together probably isn't using the audio out. It's probably using the speaker, and where everyone can hear each other like an acoustic ensemble can, and to actually respond to each other and be expressive in the volume that's near them, and to actually own the collective sound. And that's what we've been doing kind of now. The orchestra, which I've always arranged to be string-like, so it's always held notes, it's always harmonies, block harmonies, it's always lines that have a lot of phraseology to them. They've got sort of arcs, and that's really how I treat the orchestra. And then all the other bits of the arrangement come in functionality from beats or from bass lines or from sound effects. And in those categories, those other sounds create the full arrangement. But the centerpiece is this kind of cinematic sound of this collected melody with vibratos on usually. So it's this thick, rich line work and block harmonies type work. So in my mind, the orchestra itself is really just the collected sound of the stylophones, and it is like a string ensemble in my mind. And then everything else is like the other parts of the orchestra. So, the bass, you've got your brassy, you've got your for me the brass section is like the synth sort of mono synth stuff, and the percussion section and your keyboard section and your sound effects, but the main element is all the strings, the collected strings together, and that's how I imagine it. So that's why I say the more the merrier. We need more stylophone parts. And I think I also revised all that since the beginning. To go back to your question, at the beginning I had these like arrangements where I had like 6-7 stylophone parts, and I was trying to assign them out to people, but now these days it's 3 usually, and that does the job. And so the more people we have assigned to less parts, the better the sound. If we have less people assigned to more parts, then it starts to fray and get quite thin and get thinly spread like a web, and it's not so musically effective. So but that just comes through experience, I guess. and how ambitious I get with the arrangements. And, you know, sometimes our best arrangements, the ones that are like go down the best, are the ones where the stylophones are doing the easiest parts. But it works because everyone is tight and confident, and that actually accounts for something as well.
Tune in next week for part 2 of Leah Kardos' episode. If you're enjoying this episode so far, it would mean the world if you could give the podcast a 5-star rating and share the episode on social media, tagging me at Mari Dangerfield and the podcast at Sound of Stylus. You can find us on Instagram at Sound of Stylus and on YouTube by searching Sound of Stylus.